As a note, I know that the audio in this video gets a little crappy every now and then, but I've already got a new camera ordered to replace this new camera, and as soon as the new one comes in, then I'm returning this one. I just tried to make the best of this one as I could for right now. This is a 1947 Magnavox Radio that's paired with a 1947 Pilot Tuner FM tuner. I found this radio at Will & Bear's TV repair shop in spring of 1986 on East 10th Street in Indianapolis, Indiana. I was driving down East 10th Street in my 1981 Ford Escort station wagon when I passed this little strip mall that had about 5 shops in front of it. Well, in front of one of those shops there was several console TVs sitting out front, so I turned around and went back to go in to check out what they had. So as I walk in, there was several console TVs sitting around, and on top of one of the sets over along the wall was this radio. And they had it on, and so I went over to it and started checking it out. Now, since it was on top of a TV, I was just barely tall enough to see the top of this thing. Now, this thing was not finished. It was like looked like an unfinished radio, and the top of it was scratched up pretty bad. Had some cup rings in it, and this is the leftover of one of the cup rings. Looked like something had kind of ran down the front of it. The speaker grill was bashed in. Because the speakers that are in here, they're actually a little bit further back and they set off at an angle, so that way when you're backed away from it, they actually kind of aim up towards you. So that gave more room for whatever went into the front of this. There's like a, I don't know what it's called. It's not particle board, but it's got some kind of particle board of some sort that's got these squares cut out in it. But the speaker grill that supports the speaker grill. And so anyway, whatever went into the front of this, it pushed it all the way back in, and it busted that wood because it was in like a shape of a V, and the speaker grill was all ripped up. Turntable was missing. So anyways, I was looking it over. I couldn't find a price on it. So I went up to the front and asked the guy, I said, "Hey, how much is that radio?" And he goes, "I don't know, how much do you think it's worth?" And I'm like, "I don't know." So he said, "Well, let me ask you this. How much you got on you?" And I said, $20. He goes, "Okay, sold." And I'm like, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah." So I gave him the $20, and him and his buddy, they took it off the TV and took it out front, and they loaded it up into my car. And since I had that Ford Escort station wagon, they laid it down on its back and slid it in, and there was just enough room for it to fit in on each side. So I went ahead and went to work, and then I got home late that night, so I just left it in the car and went to unload it the next morning. So I was still living at my parents', and my parents did not like me dragging stuff like this home. So as I'm unloading this thing out in front of the garage, Dad comes out and sees me unloading this thing, and he goes, "Oh, so you had to buy another piece of crap, did you?" He goes, "Well, how much did you pay for this thing?" And I said, $20. Well, he gave me a look like he didn't believe me, so he went back in the house. So anyway, as for the radio was in pretty good condition. It just needed a little like cleaning up and that type of thing, because it worked pretty good at the time. I refinished the cabinet, and this was the first and the last thing I ever refinished because I hated it and didn't like the smell and all that kind of stuff. It took me a while to try to sand this down, I was trying to get all the stains out of it without losing the detail and everything, and that's why I didn't like all that, because it was a lot of work. That's why I went with the dark finish to help hide some of the rings that were still left on the top. I went to Cyber Electronics, and luckily they had a speaker grill that matched what was in here, so I was able to take the that wood particle board, whatever it was, and I was able to lay it out flat on the table. I had to kind of glue it and everything to make it to go back flat, so that when I put the grill back in, it would fit. It would fit back in there like it was supposed to be. So anyway, after I got it all done, I had stuck a CD player inside this door, and I had it on one day out there in the garage, and Dad came out after I had it finished, and he was looking it over, and he goes, "Wow, that thing sounds pretty good." He goes, looked it over, and he says, "Looks really nice too." He goes, "Well, hey, how much would you want for it?" And I said, "I don't want anything for it. I'm keeping it." And so, anyway, here we are 33 years later, and I still have it. Now, the following year, which was 1987, I wanted to do a modification to the iTube, because I did have to replace that, because when I was first looking at it, I couldn't tell that that thing was even lit until I got right up on it, and you could just barely see that that thing was even on. And as I was tuning through it, you couldn't even see that it was even responding. So the one thing I did is I added a switch to cut the filament voltage off to this thing, because I didn't see the sense in this thing sitting here burning all the time for no reason. Especially, since I'm not going to be like sitting here staring at it the whole time. So that, because I know that those things are going to be kind of getting harder to find anyway. The other thing is I had an old Voice and Music reel-to-reel tape deck that had the same type of iTube that was used as a recording level meter, and I thought that was kind of cool. So what I did is I opened up the tape deck, and it had a schematic down inside of it that showed the parts that went to that iTube. So I copied that part of the schematic down and then went and got the parts and also put those inside this. So I added the switches into the back, so that way there I can I put a switch in the back which selects it from being a signal meter, and then switch it the other way, it becomes an audio meter. Then I put a sensitivity control, and then I also put an on-off switch for the filament voltage. So this thing's on right now, so I'll go ahead and turn it on, and then I'll maybe do a little demonstration with this thing. Now the switch is down here. This is the power switch. This is the level control. So turn that on. We should see it start and light up here pretty soon. I may have to turn this light off up here, I'm not sure yet. Takes a little while to warm up. There, now I can start seeing it. Okay, let's see. Right now I think, let's see. Okay, I've got it in FM mode.
You can start by applying for a fixed rate home equity line of credit with ACU. The fixed rate means
okay, I've got it in signal mode.
Once approved, you can start using it towards your something. Maybe your something is debt consolidation, or maybe you needed to make some repairs to your home, so your something is a new roof. Whatever your something is, ACU will help you achieve it. Get started on the application by going to acuonline.org/yoursomething. That's acuonline.org/yoursomething. And don't forget to follow us on
social media. As I tuned through the station, we should be able to see it moving around a little bit.
All of our students, let them crawl up and down the line.
And he has more diamonds than anyone else. Tennessee whiskey.
Now the one thing about this tuner I've noticed, this thing always screws me up, because the fact that this thing here goes backwards from most tuners, because normally your lower numbers are over here and the higher numbers are over here, and this thing here is the exact opposite. The lower numbers are here and the higher numbers are here, so I keep forgetting that, and every time I try to tune in a certain station I always tend to go the wrong way right at first, and then I finally remember that, oh yeah, this thing's numbered backwards. So anyway, I'll go ahead and flip it over to phono here, and which then the following year, or later that year, this is when I came across an older BSR turntable. So I installed that in this thing, and when I first installed it, the cartridge that was in this thing was mono, and I put a stereo cartridge in this, and it was an old used one at that time, and since that time that I put it in there, it had failed, it had gone out. So anyway, I figure I might try to give a quick demonstration of the turntable. Let's see about getting some records here. Okay, well hopefully I found a couple songs that won't give me a copyright strike. Okay. Oh. Now the one thing I did shortly after I installed this turntable, of course, yeah, I know I still need to stain this or do something with it, I just haven't done it, is I got the idea to add a light to the turntable area. What I did is, well, here, I fixed it so that way this light's automatic, so it comes on as soon as you open the door, and then as soon as you shut it, it goes off. You can see it goes off, and it comes back on. And what I did, if you've seen my videos, my earlier videos, when I redid the Seaberg unit, the library unit, I installed a switch in it so that when the carriage went down the track and then it came back the other direction, it would head up against a switch, which is a switch that you normally find in a refrigerator for a refrigerator light. And as it comes down the track, it hits that switch and automatically turns itself off. Well, I got that idea from this thing because that's what I did to this thing a long time ago. I've got a switch mounted back in a box. So when you push this, and that's the same thing, it's a refrigerator light switch. So when you shut it, it hits that switch, and then it turns the light back on when you open it up. It also, that light, along with the turntable, when you shut this thing here off, it goes off with it. Now what I'll do is I'll demonstrate the AM tuner here. Now the shortwave, there's not a whole lot on shortwave anymore. So, I mean, it does pick up some stuff, but not a whole lot. Okay.
So give them a call or even text them at 770-594-9969 or go online at reliableair.com.
This is Wes Moss. On Money Matters, we talk a lot about income.
Now, for this thing to go into shortwave, I had to add a relay switch in this thing, and that's a whole story in itself because I had to end up redoing this thing, and I did it several years ago. But anyway, when I redid it, there was several things that happened. But the one thing I had to end up doing was adding a relay switch, so it can switch the plate voltage of a tube between two different coils, so it'll select it between shortwave and AM. And as I turn this, you'll be able to hear the relay switch inside there clicking. As you can hear it click. Now, as of for shortwave, like I said, there's not a whole lot on shortwave anymore. Usually during the day I can usually pick up something right around this area here. Check.
Para completar el líquido.
So anyway, that's the demonstration on this thing. I guess the next thing I'll do is I'll kind of give a little history, if you're still interested in listening to this part of it, of about me redoing this thing and all the problems that I ran into. Now when I first got this turntable, it had a mono cartridge in it, and I replaced it with a stereo cartridge. But the cartridge I stuck in was an old used one. And then through the years it finally failed, so when I redid this thing here, I also replaced that cartridge, put another one in. This here's a newer one. I got this from VM Enthusiasts, so this is actually a better quality one than I had in here originally. So anyway, I did have to replace that twice. Okay, now as for the switches I added for the iTube. Okay, now I put these in 1987, or actually added these to this, but I didn't have them mounted. I didn't do that until I went through and redid this thing. So they were just kind of hanging by the wires back here. So finally I got a sheet of metal and drilled the holes in and mounted them. This little switch down here, the bottom one here, that's the one that selects it back and forth between making it an audio meter or a signal meter. This one here, the long one, and I kept it long on purpose so it's easier to get to it when you reach around the back. This is the sensitivity control to make it more sensitive or less sensitive depending on where you got the volume control set at. And this switch here is what kills the turns the 6.3 volts filament voltage off and on. So go ahead and shut it off. Now I'll show you the switch to the turntable light. Now, I'm not sure how well I'll be able to show you the switch, but we'll see what we can do here. Let me switch hands. Alright. So anyway, here's the switch mounted in the box. And that's basically all it is. It's just a refrigerator light switch. So as the, well here, actually I've still got it on. I push it in. So anyway, you pull the door in, push this up against it, it turns back on. Alright. This is the back of that FM tuner, and as you can see, this thing's got a lot of mileage on it, because I didn't replace the tubes in this because they all still tested real strong. But as you can see, the bottoms of these things, you can see the filament boil off on the bottom of these tubes, and the ones inside all have that too. So yeah, I guess you can see this thing was very heavily used. Okay, now as for the problems I ran into with this thing, as this thing started aging, of course the capacitors started going off value, and even the resistors started going off value, because almost every resistor in this thing, not going up in value, they went down in value, and a lot of them had gotten way off. So what started happening as this thing started aging, the power transformer kept getting hotter and hotter, and finally it started getting to the point where if this thing was on for about half an hour, 45 minutes, the transformer would get so hot you could smell it stinking. And when you touched it, you can even keep your hand on it. See, like right now it's been on for several hours and it's just real warm. It's not hot, not like it used to get. So I stopped using it. That was about 10-12 years ago. So that's when several years ago I decided to go through and recap this thing and then also replace the resistors. Now the first problem I ran into is this thing had those micromold capacitors that look like the dominoes. And so what happened is I misread all those. And I can't remember if there was 6 or if there were 10 of them in there. But I had just redone a 1938 Zenith radio that had those same capacitors in them. And I didn't have any problems with that. Now for some reason in this one I misread every single one of them, so I don't know if it was a pre-war and post-war, if they changed something, or maybe I was drunk, I don't know what happened. All I know is every one of them I got the decimal point off. So if it was supposed to be a 0.01, I put like a 0.001 in, or maybe it was the other way around, I can't remember. But when I first got it together, I powered it up and it would not pick up anything. So I tried retuning the coils and different things in here, and it just would not pick up nothing. And the reason why I started retuning the coils, because since I replaced all the capacitors and practically all the resistors in this thing, I thought it had just really thrown it off frequency. But the only thing I could get in this thing that would come up would be 750 AM, because it's real close to here, because it's just a few miles away. It would try to blast its way through. You can just hear it distorting, trying to make its way through, but it just wouldn't do it. So I had to get a schematic to find out what I had done wrong. And that's when I found out that I misread every single one of those capacitors by 1 decimal point. So I had to replace all those capacitors. Then it worked. And then, of course, I had to retune all the coils again, because I threw them a little bit off from trying to figure out why this thing wasn't working. Well, once I got the new capacitors put in there, when I replaced them, I noticed when I first powered this thing back up, I was noticing a hissing noise inside this thing right when I first turned it on. And then after it was on for after about 20 seconds, then it would go away. So what was happening is the rectifier tube in this thing warms up almost instantly. And then finally, after about 20 seconds or so, the other tubes start to warm up, and then they start conducting, pulling that B+ voltage down. Well, the selector switch was arcing across when the rectifier tube warmed up and the other tubes were not conducting yet, because that voltage was riding at almost close to 500 volts or so. And it was section 2 switch that was inside here. You had high voltage on one side, the B+, which, let me see, I don't know if I can, which switches the voltage to that one, no, I can't, which switches the plate voltage, oh here, wait a minute, okay, the B+ voltage to the plate on this tube was connected to that switch. So the other side of that switch was a lot lower, voltage or whatever. So what was happening is, as soon as this thing warmed up, the voltage was a lot higher, and then it was trying to arc across the switch. And so when I heard that, I thought, well, I need to figure out what's going on. So I turned the thing off, let it cool down, turned it back on, and I heard it again. So the third time I did it, because I didn't find it the second time, the third time I did it, and that's when that thing just, after about 5 seconds, all of a sudden it revealed itself, because then all of a sudden it started arcing and sparking and smoking, jumping across that switch. So I turned it off real fast and got to looking up underneath there. And so anyway, what I tried to do is I tried to clean up the connections, and I even tried putting silicone on it just to see if I could stop it from arcing across. But typically once you get a carbon arc like that from something like that happening, usually you can't fix that. You normally got to replace it. So what I did is, since I couldn't get it to stop, it took me a couple days to figure out how to fix it. So what I ended up doing is I installed a 6-volt relay inside this thing to switch that plate voltage back and forth on that coil to switch it between AM and shortwave. So I guess what I could do is take this thing out and put it up on the bench and then kind of show you how I got it installed in there. Okay, I thought I'd show you on the schematic first of what was going on, and then I'll show you what I did on the inside of the radio to fix this issue. Now, it was involving section 2 of the selector switch. Now the plate voltage, or the B+ voltage, going to this tube up here on this selector switch, I don't know what the voltage was riding on this thing before I replaced all the capacitors and the resistors. I'm sure it was probably lower than it was after I replaced everything. So once I got everything replaced, the voltage may have gone way up or something, because I've seen that happen before. So what was happening is, as soon as the rectifier tube warmed up, I had about 500, close to 500 volts on this side. Well, on this side over here, it was running right around 0 volts, and then once everything warms up, it's a negative 0.6 volts. So what it was doing is, when I would first turn it on, and before all these other tubes started conducting, with that voltage being that high, it was trying to make its way across to the other side. Well, after a few times of me turning the thing on to try to find the issue, it finally did, and it was just arcing across there, and like I said, it was arcing, smoking, sparking, and all sorts of fun stuff. So anyway, like I said, I tried cleaning it up and tried to put silicone on it to try to fix the issue, and it didn't work. So after a couple days, I got the idea to get a single pole double throw relay with a 6-volt coil in it. Well, I couldn't find a single pole relay, but I found a double pole which was a little bit bigger. So what I ended up doing is I disconnected these wires right here on this switch, and I put those on the relay, and then I tapped off this tube up here, and I took off the filament voltage, which is the 6.3 volts right here, and I ran a wire down to this contact here, then over to the other side, because this is the shortwave, and that's the only time that tube is in the shortwave position is when you've got it in shortwave. When you got it in AM phono or FM, it's in the AM position. So I hooked the coil up so that there it would be energized only in the shortwave mode. So I had a wire to this contact here, then put another wire over here, then ran to the coil to the relay, and then back up to the other side of this tube right up here for the 6 volts. So anyway, I'll show you the inside of this, how I ended up doing it. This is the wait a minute. Okay, this is the relay I ended up installing. Now I was trying to get a view from the other side, but I can't get a good view of that switch because it's wait a minute. See if I can find it in the viewfinder here. Okay, it's this switch right here, and you can see right down there is a green wire and a green wire. Now those are the ones I connected to the switch here, which goes to the coil on the relay. I know I didn't do a very good job of trying to get down in there because I didn't want to try to force things too much, because I was afraid I might break these off, and if I would break those off, then I'd be probably in a hell of a mess at that point, because trying to find one of these and then having to take this whole thing apart, because all these switches, this one, all this would all have to be disconnected. This whole thing would have to be taken out, place this, and then to put it all back in, and the risk of possibly breaking these other ones off because of the age of this thing, not sure. I didn't want to chance that. So yeah, I didn't do it doesn't look all that great, but at any rate, at least it works. So then the 3 wires that were connected here on these connections, 1, 2, 3, I ended up putting over here on this relay. So now I'm using the relay to switch that plate voltage back and forth between this coil here. So I'll give a little demo. Let me turn the slide off. That relay switch has a little red light on it. Oh, just a minute. Yeah, I forgot that when you unplug those speakers, it disconnects the AC power to the unit, because those are field coil speakers, or as I sometimes call them, electromagnet speakers. So I guess it's like a safety interlock of some sort, but it doesn't really matter because I've got the rectifier tube and all that pulled out, so it's just mostly for demonstration purposes, so I just went ahead and jumped across it. So I'll go ahead and show this. Okay. As you can see, the relay's got a little red LED in there, so that way you can see when it's energized. Okay, now the reason why I did it this way is because that 6.3 volts is a lot lower voltage than the B+ that's in this thing. So I figure by trying that, I was pretty sure that, you know, it wasn't going to arc across, because there wasn't going to be that big voltage differential or difference between one side to the other. So that's why I figured by putting in a 6-volt relay, that should fix the issue. Now for me to get this thing in here, what I did is I popped the relay out of its case, and I got some epoxy and put it on the top of the case, and I stuck it down in here and waited till it cured. And then once it was in there good and tight, I snapped the relay back in there, and I wired, then hooked the wires up to the relay. So anyway, I guess that's about it. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.